So, how much was your mother's inheritance? I was utterly shocked by James' words. After my mother's funeral, without a single word of concern for me, he said this to me, who was feeling down. He must have thought the inheritance was deposited because he saw me looking at the bank book, but that was unthinkable as a human being. It was about $1 million. $1 million? That's all? But well, even after taxes, there should be hundreds of thousands left. Hearing my reluctant answer, James muttered to himself and smirked with an unpleasant smile. What an awful smile. I don't know what he's thinking, but things won't go his way. However, the next day, James quickly put his plan into action. But his shallow idea would end up taking everything from him. He had yet to realize that. My name is Hillary Morgan. I got married through an arranged marriage when I was 20. My husband's name is James. He is a company employee, 5 years older than me, and the eldest son of the Owen family. However, even though he's called the eldest son, his younger brother, Eric, left the house after graduating from university and is estranged. James was treated as an only child and was very much loved by my parents-in-law. Honestly, I didn't want to marry James. However, my mother came from a family that had been running a business for generations. I was in a position called a young lady, so I couldn't go against what my parents decided. And so, I ended up marrying James, but he also couldn't refuse me since his father was in business. We didn't marry because we had feelings for each other. It was a marriage far from happiness. Furthermore, unfortunately, we couldn't have children. Since we married young, it was hard to give up on having children. And I thought we could get out of this situation if we had a child. But, even going to the hospital didn't make it as we wished. Hey, barren woman. Are the chores done? At first, my parents-in-law, who cherished me as a young lady, started calling me a barren woman after a few years. I mean, you should be able to make it happen if you do what you're supposed to do. It's a waste of money going to the hospital. My father-in-law would also say mean things to me every day. However, James never stood up for me. Next to me, being scolded by my in-laws, he would either read the newspaper or take a nap, snoring. Even when I wanted a change of pace and said I wanted to work, he would say, "You going to work would make people think we're not doing well," and wouldn't let me leave the house. Indeed, at that time, it was common for women to become homemakers after getting married. However, living with just my mother-in-law was honestly hell every day. No one would help me. I couldn't worry my parents and consult them. And I couldn't run away because our marriage was connected to work. But still, I thought I would be rewarded someday and desperately endured every day. However, no matter how many years passed, the situation never got better. 20 years after our marriage, when I turned 40, my father-in-law died in an accident. That incident led to the discovery that his company had been evading taxes. With back taxes and fines depleting our assets, our property was seized, and the company went bankrupt. The large amount of insurance money on my father-in-law was also used for this. Though we kept the house, we had to let go of our comfortable lifestyle. I thought it would be hard for James, who was then 45, to change jobs. But my parents introduced him to a job. Thanks to that, he quickly found a job. But my mother-in-law became like an empty shell and aged rapidly. For a while, she didn't even have the energy to say mean things to me, which was a relief, but then she had a stroke and required care. With this, I truly lost any luxury to even consider trying for a child anymore. I was already 40. I was somewhat giving up in my heart, but this became the real turning point for letting go. James, as if it were only natural, pushed the care of his mother onto me. And on his days off, he spent them lounging around just like before. James, I wish you'd help with your mother's care sometimes. One day, I gathered my courage and told him this. Even if it were just on his days off, or even if it were just one meal. If he could help, it would mean so much to me. But James frowned upon hearing my words. Huh? I'm working, you know? Let me rest on my days off. James didn't seem to understand that I essentially don't have what he calls a days off. After his father's company went under, and my parents were worried about me, they finally said, "Come back home." But what would become of his mother if I left now? We have a caretaker come once a week. But I can't imagine having the money to hire one every day for this house. Despite being used and scorned, I couldn't abandon her, it just wasn't in me to do so. Eventually, James started leaving the house early even on his days off. He said he felt the sting of my gaze if he relaxed at home on those days. My wife won't even let me relax at home on my days off. I heard through the grapevine that he started saying this to the neighbors. And he began taking solo trips. The neighbors knew his mother needed care. Knowing this, yet speaking as if he's dumped all the care on me. He probably doesn't have the sense to think about how he's perceived for saying such things. It was pitiful seeing his mother, who adored James, being avoided by him once she became ill. "It's because you're here that James won't come." Sometimes she would say this, but when I replied, "Should I leave, then?" she would immediately fall silent. Continuing this lifestyle for another 20 years, the long caregiving period ended. And my mother-in-law passed away, reuniting with her husband. I was about to reach my 60s. I had no love left for James, but I had come to terms with many things. At this point, leaving didn't seem possible. And I would likely spend the rest of my days in this house. James was diligent only in his work. This was recognized, and even after reaching retirement age, he was requested to continue working as senior staff. It's a fact that this allows me to live as I do. We were never a close couple, but I am grateful for this aspect. Our marriage wasn't good, but James never tried to kick me out. He probably thinks it's too late for that now. He still seems to prefer being out of the house on his days off. So I've come to enjoy my alone time. I've even taken up pottery as a hobby. I've made friends at this age and am spending days that I can finally consider enjoyable for the first time since getting married. But this seems to have annoyed James. "You're out playing while I'm working," he said, and one day, he burned the bag I used for my pottery class in the yard. What are you doing? Don't get lost in weird hobbies. Just do the housework. My pottery materials and my pouch were still inside the bag. Even pouring water on it was too late, it turned to ashes. I was truly furious. I thought it was too late for change, but I still have a long way to go. The word divorce crossed my mind. But just as I was considering this, another misfortune struck. It was the sudden passing of my parents. My father died suddenly from an illness, and a month after his funeral, my mother also fell ill and passed away, following my father. It was all so sudden that I was engulfed in sorrow. My brother, Daniel, had already taken over my father's company. And with the many mourners at both my father's and then my mother's funerals, combined with the busyness, I ended up bedridden for about a week afterward. It must have been mental fatigue. My friends from the pottery class were considerate enough to contact me. But James alone mocked me, saying, "How long are you going to sleep?" I was shocked and tired after Mom's funeral too, but I didn't sleep that much. It must be nice being able to sleep all you want without working. It might be a valid point, but as words from a husband to a wife, it scores 0. From the next day, I forced my heavy body to get up and resumed my usual daily routine. Since I still didn't have the luxury to enjoy my hobbies, it was a bare minimum life. But James seemed satisfied, unconcerned about my feelings. Then, after some time had passed since my mother's funeral, I remembered that the payment deadline to the funeral home was approaching. Anne was looking at the bank book. Daniel was busy with work, so I had promised to make the payment on his behalf. However, James, unaware of this, saw me with the bank book and approached me with a sleazy smile. "So, how much was your mother's inheritance?" I was taken aback by his words. He said this right after my mother's funeral, without a single word of concern for me. He must have thought the inheritance had been deposited because he saw me looking at the bank book, but surely, that's unthinkable for a human being. I answered listlessly. "About $1 million. $1 million? That's it? But, well, even after taxes, there should be hundreds of thousands left." James muttered to himself and smirked with an unpleasant smile. What an awful smile. I don't know what he's thinking, but things won't go his way. Without saying anything to James, I quietly put away the bank book. Seemingly reading the room for once, James finally spoke. "Well, you've had it tough. You should rest early today." James, perhaps out of awkwardness, unusually offered kind words. Far from being happy about it, it made me feel sick. Not because James said so, but I didn't want to see his face anymore and went to bed early that day. However, an incident occurred the next day. As usual, after breakfast, James left for work. But then I received a call saying James hadn't shown up at his workplace. I was shocked. This had never happened before. Worried that he might have been in an accident, I hurriedly called James. But there was no sign of connection. As I paced around restlessly, stepping into the living room, I understood everything. On the living room table lay a piece of paper. It was a divorce form, already filled out by James. The moment I saw it, I thought, no way. And checked where I had put away the bank book the day before. As expected, the bank book was gone. Unbelievable. I muttered and sighed. It wasn't an accident or incident. James had likely disappeared on his own. I had thought he was fussing about something in the living room since the morning. James, having stolen those items, must be planning to start a new life by abandoning me. His not driving me out until now was not because he thought it was too late, but because he was eyeing my parents' inheritance. The stolen bank book was proof enough. Even with this realization, I remained calm. Or rather, there was no need to panic. I slowly filled out the divorce form and took it to the city office. James had sown the seeds of his own doing. I decided to make him fully realize that it was too late for regrets. I properly contacted James's workplace. I can't reach him either, but it doesn't seem like an accident. I'll let you know as soon as I get in touch. Sorry for the inconvenience. I apologized. The workplace said they would treat it as a paid leave for the day and wished him well, making me envious of James for being blessed with such a good workplace. After all, it was a company introduced by my parents. I hoped he would be sincere towards his workplace, but he was going to be a stranger to me now. After that, I successfully submitted the divorce form. After enduring so much, it's surprising how easily I became free. I wonder if there could have been a different life for me if I had divorced earlier. It was when I was packing up things to take with me. My phone rang. It was James, who hadn't answered my calls. I knew what he would say. I ignored it and continued packing. Yet, the phone kept ringing, again and again. Eventually, even the house phone started ringing. It was probably James, but since it was so annoying, I reluctantly decided to answer it. "Hello?" As I casually said that, sure enough, I heard James' panicked voice from the other end. "Yes. I called because I was informed you hadn't shown up for work. You should contact your workplace immediately. That's not the issue right now." James wouldn't really listen to my words. Interrupting me in a panic, he shouted, "I can't withdraw the money." Hearing his voice, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. So he finally noticed, huh? I couldn't help but think. He must not have realized it because he stole them in a hurry. I suppose so. My ID, you burned it, remember? What? No? Don't you remember? It was in the bag for my pottery class. I answered with a laugh. James seemed to be flustered. Then, this ID is. Isn't the ID expired? I wouldn't know. After his mother passed away, I repeatedly asked James to take care of the paperwork. I went to the bank for the procedure, but they said it couldn't be done because I wasn't the heir. Thus, the bank book was left untouched with just a few $10 remaining. Don't mess around. You have to properly organize things for someone who's not here anymore, right? You said you'd take care of it eventually, so keep it in. Don't blame me. Then, what am I supposed to do with this bank book? What to do or not, unless I go to do the paperwork. There's nothing that can be done about it. In my words, James kept complaining. However, I didn't feel like replying and fell silent. Impatient, James seemed to have gone back to the bank teller, explaining the situation. I accidentally burned the ID. Can't anything be done, maybe by proxy? Look, I'm on the phone with my wife right now. It seemed he put it on speaker, and I could hear the troubled voice of the teller too. I questioned his words. James. What are you talking about? You know you can't do anything like that as a stranger, right? Huh? The divorce papers were properly processed just now. Thanks for the preparation.
Bye.
I said what I wanted to say and hung up the phone. Surely, the teller must have heard my last words too. By now, James must be either pale or red with anger. Just imagining it made me laugh. Now, to leave the house before he returns. With that thought, I hurriedly packed my things. And then I left the house. My destination was the empty family home, left vacant after my parents passed away. In fact, I had inherited that family home too. My mother's assets from running a company amounted to $13 million. However, inheriting a large sum of cash would not end well if James heard of it. Especially since we had no children. Therefore, I inherited just enough to not struggle, about $1 million. And the rest was the family home and my mother's beautifully preserved dresses. My father's antiques. These heirlooms, if appraised, would amount to a considerable sum. Of course, I had my brother Daniel's permission. Daniel had moved out after getting married. Worried about the family home becoming vacant. He had children and had taken over the company. He said he was rather grateful to be able to inherit just the cash. Thus, we had peacefully completed the inheritance discussions. After arriving at the family home, I informed Daniel that I had divorced James and would be living in the family home. If you are going to live in the family home, it won't become vacant, which is a relief. But are you really going through with the divorce from James? Are you really okay with this, Hillary? Yes. We don't have children, and both our parents have passed away. If both of us want a divorce, then I think it's for the best. I want to restart my life, and I have no regrets. Daniel was worried about me being alone, but living as James' servant for life would be worse. Besides, if I could spend the last moments of my life in this house, where I spent time with my family, even alone, it would be happiness. James kept calling me many times after that. However, seemingly confused, he didn't think I would be at the family home and never came to visit. That day, I spent it alone, peacefully. The house was indeed lonely without a family, but I felt relieved from the bottom of my heart. The next day, I finally mustered up the energy to go make a deposit. The bank book was with James. It was a bit bothersome to retrieve it, but I went to get it around 6 a.m., assuming James would be asleep. Returning home, just opening the front door, the smell of alcohol hit me. Wow. I couldn't help but grimace at the smell. Entering the living room, beer cans were scattered messily. Additionally, my bankbook was torn and left on the table. This is terrible. To tear up someone's bankbook like this, no matter how angry one was. I gathered it up and put it in my bag. Along with that, I took a few clothes and returned home once again. Then, I headed to the bank. As I approached the entrance, I was called out. Hillary. James. Surprisingly, James was lying in wait for me. I noticed the bankbook was gone, so I figured you'd come here. Whether I come here or not, it's none of your business. Don't say that. We've been together for so long. Even though the divorce had been finalized, he still said such things. I ignored him and entered the bank. James continued trying to cheer me up next to me. However, I firmly ignored him. That's when it happened. Brother, isn't that Hillary? Someone called out to us. Eric, why are you here? It was James' brother, Eric. Both James and I were surprised by this unexpected encounter. We hardly saw Eric, only at funerals, almost estranged. It had been about 40 years since I married James, and this was probably only the third time we met. He had wanted to cut ties, but the in-laws, fearing the company's reputation would be damaged if it was known their son had estranged them, pleaded with him to at least show up for important family events. Since we had met at the mother-in-law's funeral a few years ago, he probably recognized us. I'm here for the inheritance of Mom's estate. Thought I'd check the balance and then inform you too. Mom's? James's eyes lit up. I was surprised too. I thought it was just a few $10 left in the bankbook, but according to Eric, there were also investment trusts set up a long time ago, and safety deposit boxes borrowed during the father-in-law's lifetime. Eric had heard about it from his mother before she passed away. She had sent him a message before her demise, saying, "If anything happens, you take care of it." However, due to his busy life, it had taken him this long to act. But, well, Eric looked apologetically at Hillary and James. What is it?
Yeah.
There was a letter in the safety deposit box along with the jewelry. Mom said all her estate should go to Hillary. What? I was surprised by Eric's words, but James seemed even more shocked. Eric pulled out a letter from the documents he had compiled. I recognized the stationery. It was because I had bought it at the request of my mother-in-law. It clearly stated all the jewelry in the safety deposit box and other assets should go to my daughter-in-law, Hillary. I could picture my mother-in-law painstakingly writing it. Shall I bring out the letter? I had asked, only to be coldly told. It has nothing to do with you. Perhaps she meant to write this at that time. I involuntarily covered my mouth. Hillary, you've been taking care of the caregiving all by yourself, right? Despite the mean things, she wrote she was sorry. She said to let me handle it because if she told James, he'd probably hush it up. Next to me, James's face turned beet red, and he began to tremble. Well, I never intended to inherit anyway, but as the legal heir, I thought I had to take care of it. It's just a change of name to Hillary. So that shouldn't be a problem for you, right, James? Eric said this nonchalantly, unaware of our divorce. Later, I was called to the bank counter. James seemed to lack the energy to follow. Without any real business, he just sat in the lobby. That day, I completed the reissuance of the bankbook, the transfer to the funeral home. Then, I'll be going ahead. Hillary, I'll contact you again. Leaving Eric and a dazed James behind, I safely returned home. Eric contacted me again later. James had protested, "Such a letter is invalid." But Eric persuaded him, saying, "Respect Mom's wishes." However, unable to convince an unsatisfied James, Eric visited a lawyer for a free consultation. Though the letter couldn't be recognized as an official will, the lawyer advised that settling by discussion would be more cost-effective than hiring a lawyer. And James agreed to the inheritance of the house. The investment trusts weren't worth much, and James grudgingly gave up on those and the jewelry. Thus, I formally received my mother-in-law's estate. If Hillary gets Mom's estate, I should get it from my mother-in-law, right? James challenged the lawyer, but that was a different matter. It was embarrassing. Even scolded by the lawyer, James couldn't accept it and finally tracked me down at the family home, showing up at our doorstep. I was wrong. Let's start over. Realizing he couldn't receive anything and kneeling at the doorstep, he begged for reconciliation. Start over? There was never any love between us to begin with. What's there to start over? For the first time, I conveyed my long-held feelings to James. He fell silent, seemingly regretting his actions for the first time, and I couldn't help but smile. At least you kept the house, right? Oh, have you contacted your workplace? If you're so desperate for money, better work hard. Don't lose your job. After saying just that, I closed the door. It was finally over. The bank book held assets left by our mothers. With this, I would surely live comfortably from now on. James, however, continued to be absent from work without notifying his workplace, leading to his dismissal. I had warned him. Losing even his passion for work, what was left for him? Perhaps his diligent work was not out of responsibility, but to maintain his dignity. Now without anyone to show his dignity to and missing the easy money he thought he'd get, it wouldn't be surprising if he felt he had lost his purpose in life. Despite being concerned for someone I had spent years with, that was it. I had no intention of helping him. I truly apologize for the trouble caused to you, Hillary. It's really regrettable. Eric was the only one who apologized for everything, and told me I no longer needed to deal with James. Realizing the family's abnormality, early on, Eric had left home young, probably living happily now without involving his family in that home. James had become a recluse, but at his age, he could probably live on his pension. Wanting to start over showed he had the courage, at least. He should try starting over on his own. I began attending pottery classes again. My friends were delighted with my return, and I hadn't realized how enjoyable it could be to spend time just for myself. At the pottery class, I even met someone wonderful, though I swore off marriage. Being with someone who loves me might also be a form of happiness rather than being alone forever. It might feel too late, but just like with the divorce, it's never too late as long as you're alive. Anyone can find happiness, no matter their age. I believe that.